collecting sheep dung samples in the paddock for a worm egg count. When you need to collect fecal samples for a worm test, here are some tips to make it faster and easier. You head out to your paddock where the sheep are grazing. You approach the mob and they will move into a group. Hold them in a group for a few minutes. While you're doing that, the sheep will pass dung onto the ground. After a few minutes, you can collect your sampling gear. This will include a glove, some containers or bags, either 10 small containers if you're collecting for an individual wet test, or one large container if you're collecting for a bulk test. By the time you wander back, the sheep will have moved off. You want them to move off slowly so they don't knock around and disturb the dung piles. If you are collecting for an individual wet test, you'll be collecting into individual containers or bags. You want to pick up 5 to 10 pellets from a pile and ideally fill the small containers to exclude as much air as possible. This will help avoid the risk of worm eggs hatching in transit. You'll do that with 10 separate piles until you've filled all 10 of your small containers or bags. If you're collecting into bags, make sure you squeeze out the air before you seal them. It's best to collect in a basic grid pattern over the area you held the sheep. That way, you'll be sure you're not picking up from the same dung pile twice. If you're collecting for a bulk wet sample, you'll just have one large container or bag. You now want to move over the area, again in a grid-like pattern, picking up 1 to 2 pellets from 20 to 40 different piles of dung. The key is to pick up the same amount of dung from each pile. Smaller young sheep may have smaller pellets, so you may need 3 or 4 instead of 1 or 2. You'll end up with about 1 cup of dung when you finish collecting. Again, remember to exclude as much air as possible. You then take your sample back home and send it off to the lab for a worm egg count, or do the worm egg count yourself.